Today on Growing Freedom, we're joined by my good friend and colleague, David Whitehead, the Truth Warrior. With a lifetime of study and interest in the esoteric aspects of martial art philosophy, David gives an in-depth presentation on his unique perspective on the warrior archetype and shares his ideas on the many modern-day applications of this ancient warrior philosophy for individual and societal empowerment. Without further ado, David Whitehead, welcome to Growing Freedom.
Hey Bob, how's it going, man? Pleasure to be with you.
I'm very excited about the show today because, as I mentioned, you're just a cornucopia, one of my favorite words, of information. And as you know, this is a series dedicated to solution-oriented thought, taking a look at the profound truths and, more importantly, what the hell we're going to do about it all. David, you have a background in martial arts, and this way of the Truth Warrior is very big in your philosophy. Tell me a little bit about the tie into martial arts and the philosophy of the Truth Warrior.
Well, it was something that has really just been my journey of this. It's just my experience, my take on it. I always try to make sure that people understand that not everybody will agree on every point, and even other researchers in the field of martial art philosophy or history or studying warrior cultures or whatever will agree on everything, as you'll find in any subject. But this is what I tried to do, was bring out what spoke the loudest to me in my journey of martial arts and how it's actually relevant to the average person living in the world today and facing the problems that we're all discussing, and the issues that you're bringing up on your show and in your upcoming conference, which I'm very excited to be a part of, by the way. And so it's something that for me was about my journey of growing into becoming a man. And I can speak just from that perspective because I happen to be a man. And I grew up in a place of being, I guess, just kind of grew up in a lot of fear, had a lot of issues growing up, went through a lot of challenges. And I had watched the Ninja Turtles, watched some martial art films, and was very influenced by just at first glance, when I watched the first live demonstration of martial arts, I was blown away by seeing these average looking people that wouldn't look threatening, wouldn't look like they know how to completely obliterate you in under 30 seconds. And yet here they are doing these beautiful movements. It wasn't all about violence. It wasn't all about who could break boards and who could, kick somebody in the throat or any of that kind of stuff. It was about this empowerment, this confidence, this air of confidence that wasn't like some kind of cockiness or like over the top egoism or anything. It was more of just somebody that was very grounded, looked at you in the eyes when they were talking to you, very sure of themselves. And then when they would express their art form, which was martial arts, through physical movement, it was something that I didn't even know how to say how it inspired me and why it spoke to me. It was subconscious for me. So I kept going and watching tournaments. I kept going to my local dojo, and I would just kind of sneak in there and sit on the side and watch the classes. And at the time, my parents weren't really thrilled about me getting involved in martial arts because they had sort of that misconception that a lot of people have, unfortunately, thanks to the way martial arts is portrayed and the way that we sort of maybe look at it. And I was always trying to talk them into it. I'm like, no, this will be really, really good for me. And, I was getting picked on at school and in my neighborhood. I was a small, scrawny little kid and hadn't really developed my voice yet at that point. So I was dying to go and learn from these martial art masters because I just found that they had just a level of self-esteem that I could only dream about at that age. And finally, my parents said, okay, well, our kid is out in the backyard practicing katas in the morning and he's jumping off the garage roof trying to do flying side kicks, and I ended up tripping over some stuff and flying through a window and cut my arm up really bad. And yeah, I was really committed to learning. And so finally they said, okay, let's just go sign him up. He'll be safer at least, and then we'll take it from there. And lo and behold, the longer I was in it, the more it changed my life, and it helped me through some really dark times. And my parents saw that and they became my biggest supporters. My dad would be driving me around to tournaments and stuff like that. And I decided to commit my life, or commit a significant portion of my life at that time, to learning this. And for me, it was always a philosophical basis first, and then the sort of technical aspects of training. I loved the training. I loved, how to defend yourself, it became like a game of human chess, and it was an artistic expression and all that stuff. But I came into it first by reading history and philosophy out of a lot of these different martial arts schools. And not all of them Eastern, by the way. A lot of people only associate martial arts with Eastern philosophy, but there's a martial art tradition that exists in literally every single culture known to human history, and they all have their take on it, but there's also things that are very common that you'll find through them. And so what I've been doing is trying to take an eclectic approach at researching these different ideas and bringing out what I feel is the best parts of them, and the most relevant parts of them, to help the average person achieve personal empowerment and achieve freedom in their own personal life, living today. And because we go off the model that freedom is never something that is going to be handed to you by the world.
It's not an external factor.
Exactly.
It's got to come from within. And that's one of the things that speaks to me so much about your work, is this idea of self-reliance and sovereignty and independence. And on your website, you have a Bruce Lee quote: "Be self-aware rather than a repetitious robot." And that kind of sums up where we're coming from this truther perspective, and this perspective of growing freedom is finding your own truth, no matter who tells you in the masses that you're full of it. The truth is the truth. You're not just a robot, and that comes from profound inner work as opposed to a dependency on mind control.
Well said, man. And it's a great quote. I love reading Bruce Lee's stuff. Actually, there was just recently some stuff that was released about a lot of his personal writings. He had a lot of diaries and a lot of stuff that he'd be writing on cocktail napkins and stuff like that his family gave permission to be released. And it wasn't released before. I used to love reading his books, and a lot of people just remember him as a flashy movie star. But this guy, in his time, was far ahead of his time. And he also, the interesting thing about him is he came from the East. He came from the Eastern school of philosophy. But when he came to the West, he studied a lot of Western philosophy as well. So what was unique about Bruce Lee was that he brought sort of the best of both worlds. Because there's a lot of things that I didn't agree with when it came to Eastern mysticism and Eastern philosophy. And there was a lot of things in Western stuff that I didn't really like, but there's a lot of good things on both sides. And what I felt was when you'd read his writings, it just had a way of hitting you. And one of my favorite quotes that just kind of came out, that this was just him writing in his personal diary, where he was saying, where some people have a self, most people have a void, because they are too busy and wasting their vital creative energy to project themselves as this or that, dedicating their lives to actualizing a concept of what they should be like, rather than actualizing their potentiality as a human being.
That's mind control.
Exactly. It's mind control, it's cultural conditioning, it's all of the above. And it's something that when we talk about being unslaved, and this is what I'm going to really be focusing my entire talk at the Free Your Mind conference on, is that we often have these discussions, which are very important, about what we should do politically and socially and with what's going on with the world issues. But what gets left at the door a lot is what we can do as individuals right now, no matter what situation you're in, no matter what country you live in, no matter what social structure or political structure you live in. If you're under communism or you're under capitalism or you're under whatever system you want, the world is not, the freedom concept is not external. There are things we can do to improve that condition, and there are great people doing great work to fight that fight. But even if you achieve the perfect system, and the perfect system of either government or non-government, whatever side of the debate you want to be on, you're still living amongst other human beings. You're still living amongst people that are walking around that either have a concept of a self and either have morality and a concept of being and are healthy mentally and physically and spiritually, or you're living amongst people that are the opposite end of that spectrum. And we typically today are living in, I would say, an overwhelming majority of the latter, right? So this is why I've decided, after all of the research that I've done and the shows I've done, and I've changed a lot of my opinions on things, and I'm sure you feel the same, Bob. Like, it's up and down. You're going on a constant thread of growth and looking at things and research, and it takes time. But I've come down to the point where I feel like there are people doing great work in this field. My contribution is going to be centered around solutions for the individual, because that's my experience. That's where I come from. The martial art world opened that door for me. and I use that as like a canvas or like a scientific lab where I can experiment with things in a physical domain, then I can go, hey, when I was learning this mount escape, or I was learning to block this punch, I was learning this technique, I learned a lot about this idea in philosophy. I learned a lot about myself. I learned about how I'm limiting myself with my own limiting belief system, or there's better things I can do as a parent. Now I'm a parent of 2 young girls, like what a crazy time to be a parent raising children, especially girls.
You're telling me.
You know what I mean?
Telling me.
Like that's crazy. So this is why I feel like this is the most value I can offer. And that's why I really, it also is because it changed my life. Like I have direct experience with this. Sure. Other things are just, I read books. I think there's good points made and I can regurgitate those things. But I feel like the best kind of information for a person to share is experiential information. So that's why I want to bring this point forward for people.
David, I want to get into a step-by-step way to find your own empowerment and to find the inner warrior within you, and a way that we can protect our own consciousness from the vampires out there. And we're going to do that in the second part of the show, where you're going to actually take us on a step-by-step guide to finding that empowerment. I'm very excited about that. But first, let's talk a little bit more about the flip side of this, and that is the victim mentality. Far too often, as conspiracy theorists, and I say that with air quotes, we're looking at what they are doing to us. We're looking at the powers that shouldn't be, as I like to put it, and their megalomaniac plans against humanity. We're looking at oftentimes dwelling on how they're screwing us. But oftentimes we completely lose perspective on how we are kind of fulfilling the very victim mentality that, in my opinion, they want us to assume the position of. Talk to me about the victim mentality.
Well, this is one of the most important points to bring up, Bob, and I'm glad you did, because again, speaking of experiential knowledge, I experienced this directly when I was maybe about 10 years ago, leading up to about 7 years ago or so, I was in that mindset of first learning about what was going on globally, learning about the lies of history, learning about the lies that we've been told by the media, etc. And you go through that period of anger. You go through that reactionary period, which is very normal and natural, where you're mad as hell, right?
Yeah, absolutely. We all have that.
Yep.
It's when we dwell on that and don't grow beyond that I see the problem.
Agreed, 100%. And that's what I felt kind of happened to me. And I felt like I was just cycling around looking at the gutters of the world and looking into the darkest corners possible and looking into all the most evil, twisted shit you can imagine to just try to understand the world. And there's a necessary time for that. But what that ended up doing to me was it started spiraling me back into feeling a lot of anger and hatred and depression and pointing fingers, and it became almost like an instinct for me to point and shoot at other people, even in my own personal life. It wasn't just about pointing at the global banking cabal or whatever. It was about pointing at even regular people around me and saying, it's your fault that my business is failing, or it's your fault that I'm not feeling up to my best today, or it's your fault that I'm making mistakes in training today, or it became a mindset it kind of leaked in subconsciously, that I started to have to go, hold on a second, this is just completely opposite to what originally inspired me to start going on this journey of understanding the world. Because the whole point of any of us, in my opinion, talking about looking at things socially or politically or geopolitically, is that it's ultimately a learning process about the self, about you. You have to be able to take that information and bring it into your own life and analyze how, in many ways, we are our own tyrants. We are our own Federal Reserve restrictive policy in many ways. You know what I'm saying? And we become our worst enemy. And this was something that was it was up on the wall in most of the dojos I trained. You aren't fighting your opponent, you're fighting yourself. The greatest enemy you have is, the dark wolf within you, like these kind of things. And when I realized that the reason tyrants have taken control again and again in history politically is because there has not been a sufficient immune system-like reaction on behalf of the people of those areas or those countries to keep that in check. I mean, typically there wouldn't really be anything that wrong with a very limited government that was actually there as an administrative arm on behalf of the people and was there only to protect individual rights and property rights. If that's all we had, we probably wouldn't even be able to use the word government. It'd be a totally different word. But we didn't get that because instead we didn't look at what was going on within each and every one of us as an individual. There was no personal development. We were brought up in a lot of collectivistic type thinking. And then what ends up happening is, as a whole, all we do is sit there and shout down the political establishment and shout down all of these forces, which, yes, have become corrupt. Absolutely. There's no argument there. But my question is, why did that happen? How did that happen? It didn't just happen because evil people exist that corrupt things. It happened because the good people did nothing. There was something missing. There was an essential ingredient missing in the average person that made up a society, no matter which culture you look at, because trust me, everything has been tried in human history. Every system has been tried. But each one will finally find some form of corruption and collapse in on itself. So why does that keep happening? Even like looking at the founding of America as a great example, trying to liberate themselves from the British Empire and create a totally, free individual rights and private property and all this. But then, again, getting rotten and corrupting and slowly degrading into what we have now. It's always happened because the individual has been left at the door. Consciousness has been left at the door. There's not a concept of self. There's no empowerment. The personal empowerment thing has become more of a tag word or a cool phrase, but there's no depth to it. There's no real philosophy there. And all the real thinkers and the people and the artists that have been trying to educate humanity about these things have been washed aside and replaced with the Justin Biebers and Lady Gagas of the world. So we are in a situation where we're in a cultural meltdown. Yes, because of external influences, but if we only point the finger at the establishment or those people or Hollywood or any of these things, and we only put it on them, we kind of forget that when you point fingers, you got fingers pointing back at you to indicate that there is, yes, corruption and evil afoot in the world. There's no argument. History is a record of that. What are you going to do about it? That's my message. What are we going to do about it? You can't just vanquish it from the face of the earth and hope that we're going to have some global utopia tomorrow. It's not going to happen. I mean, it's not, maybe it'll happen, but it hasn't happened yet. And we're not there yet. So you have to think about.
In the meantime.
Exactly. In the meantime.
In the meantime, I got an idea, David. And
oh, I lost you there, Bob. Can you still hear me?
I can. And I have a solution.
There we go.
It's a pretty easy solution. And it consists of one of the most basic words in all languages. And that word is no. N-O. Abstinence. If we simply say no to government, no, I'm not going to participate, I'm not going to pay taxes. No, I'm not going to eat genetically modified food. Or no, I'm not going to watch your Super Bowl and Illuminati ritualistic programming. Or no, I'm not going to participate in your war. If we simply said no, and we have that power ultimately, as much as we talk about the chains that are there, at the end of the day, as somebody who understands what's happening, as somebody who has the wherewithal to say, these vaccines are probably not the best thing. Simple solution. Say no.
Yeah. It's probably the most powerful word you have. I agree. And the thing is that what does it take to say no? It takes courage. It takes more courage to say no than it does to say yes. If you're out with a bunch of buddies at the bar and you're having a couple drinks and someone starts making racial slurs or starts saying something out of turn or starts speaking maybe against a friend that you have together that's, you're speaking behind their back or whatever, and you just laughingly go along with it because it's easier to go along with it. You don't want to start conflict. You don't want to ruffle any feathers. But you're actually doing yourself a disservice and you're silencing your true instinct, which would be to say, hey, I find that offensive. I don't agree with that. Or I'm going to say no to that. I'm going to say, you know what, we probably shouldn't be talking about this guy behind his back. Or let's talk about that more logically. Let's open that up. You've brought up that subject. Let's talk about it. That takes courage. It takes courage to even just, and that's just a scenario where a couple guys are sitting around the bar. Imagine now taking that into the bigger spectrums of life. So the ability to say no comes from somebody that has developed a sense of confidence in who they are, that has a sincere ability to actually have an educated, self-generated opinion on anything, and knows how to diplomatically stand up. Now, you don't have to start smashing people. You don't have to start swearing at people. You don't have to start freaking out at people, because that's just not effective. What you can do, though, is be diplomatic and be intelligent and bring a different side to the story. And if we did that in our personal lives, then maybe we could graduate to doing that more in our local communities and influencing our political situation, etc. But if the average person doesn't even have the balls to say no when they hear something that's offensive, how the hell are we going to move forward as a civilization? It's just not going to happen. So that's why I feel like when I teach martial arts, I work a lot with kids and teens. I work with adults as well, but a lot of adults are, it takes a lot of work to deprogram that stuff. When they're young, it's easier to influence, right? In a good way. And when I work with these kids, the one thing I try to establish in them is that level of confidence that if you know that physically you can handle yourself, physically, that if someone got so mad at you that they just started swinging punches at you, that you could easily dispel that situation and shut that situation down. When you have that knowledge, then you're going to, it just takes away that layer of fear that you would have of voicing your opinion or standing up, or when someone's bullying you at school, calling you a loser. I ask the kids all the time, I'm like, give me the Rolodex of all of the names you get called in school. Who's picking on you? What's his name? How big is he? When does he haunt you the most? Is it after lunch? Is it like, I try to get them to tell me this stuff, and they, every single one, I probably got like 20 teens on my mat. Every single one of them has a story to tell. And so I take that and I say, okay, how do we deal with this? Do you believe what they're telling you? Do you believe that you're a loser or a white nuts or whatever, whatever they're calling you, right? Do you believe that? And they go, no, I don't believe that. That's stupid. Why would I believe that? And I go, well, the only reason it's offending you and bothering you and making you go home and cry at night is because you're giving them ground. You believe you're becoming, you're agreeing with your attacker. And when you start studying psychology on a deep level, and you start studying like beaten wife syndrome and Stockholm syndrome and cognitive dissonance and all this, you'll realize that people identify with the abuser. And the only time that happens is when there's no self, when there's no confidence, when there's no morality, when there's no empowerment, right? And no health. So therefore, they need those handrails, and the only handrails given are by abusers, because they think, yeah, you know what, you're right. And so I try to deprogram these kids. I obviously don't break it down in such depth with them. I keep it very simple, but I try to just get them thinking about it. And I say, people can throw all the names they want at you. People can throw punches at you. People can physically try to hurt you. But you have to look at who you are, that true free self that exists somewhere inside you. You have to look at that as impenetrable unless you allow access. It's like I use the sickness of the body or the health of the body as an example. If you're getting the colds and flus regularly, every time they come around, and I see all these people, they're sick 6 months out of the year, they're catching everything that possibly goes around the circles, and you're getting that, there's a problem with your immune system. You don't need more drugs. You don't need more vaccines. You have a problem with a dysfunctional immune system. So what's the solution? Putting Band-Aids on the problem? Accepting that, oh, well, sickness 6 months out of the year is just a fact of life. I'm just going to accept it. Or would it be to get to the root cause of what's going on and repair your immune system and strengthen your immune system so that you're not catching every flu in the book? And the same is true with these kids dealing with bullies, or any adult out there that's dealing with these kinds of things. And you could extrapolate that to all of society. That there's a problem with the immune system response psychologically. There's a psychic immune system that has been easily penetrated, and we have gone along with it and therefore given ground over to these psychic vampires, or whatever you want to call them.
Exactly. That's exactly what came to mind, is that these psychic vampires will prey on you. These gaslighters, these mind controllers, these occultists, they will very much play on that, and they will go after you. And if you don't have a firm foundation in truth, then you will be manipulated, and you will begin to think that what the bully is calling you is indeed something that should affect you. Now, that being said, if somebody gives you constructive criticism, on the other hand,
right, totally different.
Hear it.
Exactly. Open
yourself to that truth. Remain agnostic to say, for instance, let's walk through this. David, I'll play the bully. All right, you be the guy who's being picked on. Cool. And by the way, I say that knowing full well you can kick my ass, so I better be careful here.
I'll have to text message a punch somehow. I don't know how to do this.
Good thing he's not in the same room right now. I got to watch out for your mind here. But David, if I say, for instance, that you are a girl, you're a girl. I'm going to use something very elementary, right? It's very childish. David, you're a girl.
Right.
Well, you could say to yourself, no, I'm not. I'm not a girl. And the more you kind of react to that, the more you feed into that. When ultimately, if somebody says to you, David, you're a girl, you don't even have to blink knowing that that's just bullshit. That's not the truth. You know the truth. So why allow that to escalate the situation, to trigger you emotionally, and so on and so forth? It's like all this bullshit political correctness stuff. Everybody wants to be triggered. They have to go to their effing safe place. And ultimately, they just need to grow some truth.
Yeah.
They just need to find truth, and they won't be manipulated. They won't be triggered, as they say these days.
Oh, 100%. And yeah, I love that we're talking about the flip side of this, because in a way, I know this might sound controversial to people, but what if bullying, I mean, people say it's an epidemic, and it could be, but what if bullying is sort of a natural tribal kind of thing that happens at a young age, where you're dealing with adolescent minds that, this is a normal thing. They haven't been developed. So clearly they're going to go and find, smaller people to victimize. They're going to call them names. They're going to pick on, they're going to push them around. They might even punch them out a few times. But maybe in some way there needs to be a little bit of that in order to strengthen that community or strengthen those people. Okay. Now, it'd be nice if we lived in a world where we had zero challenge to rise up to, if we had no bullies, if we had no tyrants, if we had no whatever. And I'm not in any way condoning like extreme forms of evil or anything like that. Like we need pedophiles in order to help us realize that pedophilia is wrong. I'm not saying that. I'm talking more in the context of bullying here, okay? Where, what you're pointing at here is that sometimes people take that victim mentality to the extreme, and now every comment you say, everything you say is now policed, and now, that you're bullying me, you're offending me. This whole thing about everybody's offended by having actual like intellectual conversations about what's going on. Like you and I, Bob, we don't have to agree on everything. We could take a point and we could find a point that we don't agree on, and we could sit here as two rational, calm human beings, intelligent, having an intelligent debate, having a real argument about a topic. And honestly, that is a normal function. We need argumentation in society. If we don't...
I'm going to get as cliche as it gets here, David, but sticks and stones can break your bones. But words should be looked at intellectually, philosophically.
Exactly.
We should not have such pent-up emotional triggers involved here. And this touches on a topic that I'm very involved with, which is emotional intelligence.
Right.
And that's a big part of what we're talking about here, is having the wherewithal and the emotional intelligence to not be triggered. I love that term. That's a new one.
I'm so triggered. I'm so triggered right now, Bob. I'm so triggered.
So, that's emotional intelligence. And the lack of emotional intelligence bleeds into the lack of the ability to have taboo conversations, which then creates a society where people don't know what the hell happened on 9/11 yet, now over 16 effing years later. Yep. Because they've been so emotionally manipulated, so that if they ever breach the topic in a contrary fashion to what the lamestream has conditioned them to think, they are no longer able to think constructively and critically. And that lack of critical thinking is a major part of this agenda.
It is, and we don't have anything educating people about how to think critically and how to properly construct an argument and how to how to look at things comparatively. Like what ends up happening is people hear a few points from, say, the Karl Marx's manifesto or whatever, or take or the Quran or the Bible. They take a few quotes that sound good and appeal to them on a deep emotional level. And then they go and they don't do any comparative research. They don't look into the history. They don't look at it in context. They don't compare anything. And so they just go, that's my opinion now. And they're not taught how to say, well, hold on, we have to look at multiple points of view and then come to an opinion, and then realize that an opinion is something that is not fixed in stone. It can change when new information shows up. It's the real scientific method. It's the real method upon which you find out whether something is true or whether it's false. But when you live in a world that's promoting moral relativism, where everything's relative, we live in a materialist scientific paradigm that preaches determinism, and I'm going to be debunking the shit out of this in my presentation because it's key. And they're out there talking about how everything's predetermined. You have no control over your actions, and therefore no responsibility over your actions, and therefore everything's relative, because you would have made that decision to eat a Big Mac and cheese 30 years from now. There's no way you would have selected a different choice because your genetics predetermine your decisions in life. Everything's a mechanistic universe. We're on a clock cycle, and you don't have a self. You have no free will, etc. This is one of the biggest lies. And you know what? A lot of these guys, these Sam Harrises and these people that are out there talking about this stuff, and just a quick note about Sam Harris. There's a few things I've liked about what he said in certain subjects, but he's really going off the rails today with this whole determinism thing. They're presenting it as if it's a new thing. Oh, we have a new theory. This is what science is now discovering. We're looking under some more microscopes, and now we have data that's saying that everything's predetermined and you have no free will. Well, hold on a second. This has been a school of thought that's been around since before. I mean, it's the medieval mindset. It's a whole thing that comes out of a different school that's been around forever. And many, many, many very, very eloquent counter arguments have been presented to completely demolish that argument. But they don't get talked about because it wouldn't be promoting the cultural Marxist social agenda to create moral relativism, because moral relativism justifies psychopaths and justifies psychopathic behavior, because they're like, well, that psychopath, we have to have a place for him too. We have to. I mean, we can't lock them away. We can't deal with them appropriately when they're breaking the law and killing people and harming people. They have a place in our society. Evil has a place in our society. And you know what? Let's bring in a bunch of opposing ideologies into one place, and let's have everybody fight it out, and let's create more division, shall we? But we're going to do it under the guise of trying to make the world unified and cultural diversity and all this kind of stuff. And it brings in this whole new dimension of where people are now even more confused than they were before. Because now you go online and you got people sharing their opinions on Facebook, and you got people writing articles about this, and they come from that, and it's hard for the average person to even grasp the topics and understand them fully to construct an opinion. Yet what we get is people that just hear a couple headlines from CNN, or they read a paper here, or they read one book, and they go, yeah, that made a little bit of sense to me, so therefore that is my opinion, and it's unflexible and unchanging. And this is a problem. And so just to bring it into martial arts a little bit, I can prove anybody wrong about this if they were to come down to train with me just for a week. I could prove them wrong because, for example, I take a technique in jiu-jitsu. Jiu-jitsu is a very complex martial art. It's probably the most complex martial art. It's just a variety of ways of manipulating and entangling the human body. And I can take a technique and say, this is the way to set up the triangle choke from this position. This is the way. All the other ways that you're going to learn are complete and total bullshit. You must follow only my way of learning how to set up this triangle choke. But then guess what? The way I showed you how to set it up maybe didn't work for your body type. Maybe you've got shorter legs, shorter arms. So therefore, if you're setting up the triangle choke, you have to learn how to create angles and leverage. And there's a bunch of other things you have to do for your body to be able to pull that off realistically. So you go to some school thinking that you've been told the ultimate truth about setting up the triangle choke. And you go to some other school where they just wipe the floor with you and it didn't work. And you come back questioning, going, well, I was told that theoretically this is the only way, when in fact there's like 10,000 ways you set up that choke. And that's just one example. So what ends up happening is you start to learn when you're using your body and you're working in the physical world with something, you learn really quickly that there's multiple ways of looking at things. And in order to truly understand a thing, you've got to be able to walk around it a few times. You've got to be able to gain some objectivity. You've got to be able to separate your emotional connection to the thing by saying, I'm right and you're wrong. And that's all I care about. I don't care about the truth of the matter. I don't care about the fact that I might be wrong and there might be a better way of doing something, and I have to be open-minded if I want to receive that. We don't want that. We're like children. We're in arrested development. We just want to be right for once. We just want to win. We just want a quick, easy fix. I don't want to have to do 20 years of training to come to a level of expertise. I want it downloaded into my brain through a microchip processor. I want it delivered to me through a fast food drive-through window. I want to download an app that'll do that for me. I don't want to work for anything anymore. So when I bring people in,
what does the book say, right? What does the book say?
What does it say on paper? Says. Exactly. Right. You know what I could do, Bob? I could sit you down in a room and I could sound very logical, and I could pull up a whiteboard and I could theoretically draw out all 20 movements of martial arts. There's essentially, people boiled it down to 20 movements and there's thousands of variations, okay? I could sit down and theoretically explain how everything works and how the body works, and you could sit there after a while and go, you know what? I have a really good understanding of martial arts now. You know what? In fact, I want some kind of a diploma for doing this course. I could get you to answer Q&As. I could get you to do a multiple choice questionnaire, sign it off and go, you know what, Bob, you're one of my best students. You listened to everything I said to you and you repeated it perfectly. You've passed, right?
Thank you.
But here's the problem. You're going to go out on the street. Hold on, let me finish this point. You're going to go out on the street. Some guy's going to come up and, push you around and start making fun of you, and then he's going to start throwing punches at you, and none of that theoretical information will work for you. And you want to know why? It's because
why? I answered all your questions correctly.
Yeah, and you read, and maybe you even pulled out the notes while the guy's punching you in the face. You go, hold on. Oh, right, I'm supposed to move left and counter with my right. Okay,
I did that.
But is it where martial arts is something that also has to do with body intelligence? So you can't logically think about it. It's intuitive. It has to be built to an intuitive level. Even if you came and trained for a year in something, you'd still go in and your mind would go blank. You'd be like, oh, was it left or was it right? Was it my right hand on his left wrist or was it my right hand on his knee, or what would I have to do? Like, the logical way of processing information, which is what we get out of materialism in science, is good for some things, but it's completely destructive when it comes to stuff that is in the physical reality and how it actually applies to life. So what I'm telling you is that the only way for you to become proficient at something like martial arts or dance or hockey or whatever is to actually practice it, to sweat, to bleed, to make mistakes, to get your ass kicked. Like, you have to get, for jiu-jitsu, just as a fact, or martial arts, you have to get your ass kicked for years and years of getting your ass kicked. And then when you start kicking a little bit of ass, guess what?
Okay, now it's your turn. This is the part where you can subscribe to help Growing Freedom and to help us continue this hard work. We need you to subscribe at this point. Hold that thought, because David Whitehead will be back with more in part 2 for subscribers only. So please, if you could go to the right of the page and subscribe to Growing Freedom, we'd appreciate your help to continue this great work.